Thank you, Jerry, also for touching on my inferiority complex. Because I'm surrounded by cops at work, or cops that I deal with, like John, and always in the shadow of them to a certain extent. So Welshman, I grew up in a community actually not dissimilar to this one in Glentees, so I wouldn't say it's like coming home, but I do feel like it's a familiar place for me. And now I'm in charge of the European Law Enforcement Agency. We're about 1,000 people in The Hague, a budget of 100 million, so relatively small, and with no formal executive powers, like Garda Síochána. We don't make any arrests, we don't run any informants. But that's not our job. Our job is to act as a platform for interconnecting the police community, of which Garda plays an important part. In fact, we have 700 law enforcement agencies on our information sharing platform, exchanging thousands of messages every day. We have specialist centres at Europol giving really valuable intelligence and operational support to leading criminal and terrorist investigations around Europe. And we have a community of 200 liaison officers from 43 countries that have full executive powers themselves. They're embedded right in our building, working alongside my analysts. And between both of them, they're running thousands of operations a day. So converting our analysis capability, our specialist skills, into real operational work and allowing people like the teams that John runs to make the arrests that they need to do to disrupt organised crime and terrorism around Europe. Now, doing that on such a large scale and giving a very strong overview of what we see across Europe, our primary aim, of course, is to give operational support, but from that we get this rich strategic picture of what the threat looks like, not least in the field of terrorism, where we've been asked to grow our mandate since the dreadful attacks in the last 18 months. We've now established for the first time a European counter-terrorism centre at Europol, and clearly a top priority for our organisation. Let me just reflect on what we see of the threat and how we're contributing to respond to it. In fact, my analysis, I share the analysis of both John and Paul in terms of the terrorists. There is one particular judgment from Paul that I don't agree with, however. I'm from the London School of Economics, which is the best university in London. You were worried then, Paul, weren't you, what was I going to say? So Paul in particular touched on the threat from lone actors. John talked about other dimensions as well. I'm going to zoom out, and from a European perspective, let's see how the threat looks from those that have gone to Syria and Iraq and are beginning to return, what we call foreign terrorist fighters. But I agree with him, and I agree with John's statement actually, a very complex, dynamic threat. And the events of the last 18 months, beginning with the attacks in Charlie Hebdo and now in Nice and this axe attack in Bavaria as well, show just how volatile the threat is. And when you look at it together, it's certainly the highest terrorist threat that Europe has faced since 9/11, in my view. I have no doubt about that. Dynamic, unpredictable quality to the threat, ranging from these lone actors through to what we saw in Paris and Brussels, which were network-style operations. The sending back from the conflict zones of Syria and Iraq, battle-hardened, well-trained terrorists carrying out well-planned operations aimed at mass casualties in public places. It's gone up a gear in terms of what we've seen from international terrorist groups in the past. It reflected a strategic decision that ISIS took last year, we know that, to go after us in the West in a more direct and aggressive way, to go global in their activities. I think partly as a result of the fact that they're being squeezed militarily on the ground in that region, and it might serve as a distraction, maybe another way of sustaining the loyalty, motivation of the people that are part of their cause. But whatever the reason is, they're lashing out like a caged animal, I think, and coming after us in our backyard in a way that makes it very, very dangerous to deal with right now. So the threat as a whole, very high, very dynamic, and that's borne out by the facts as well. Today, Europol released its annual terrorism report, where we survey from all of the information we collect from police agencies and security services around Europe just what the terrorist scene looks like. And in 2015, 221 attacks, attempted attacks, foiled attacks in Europe. Not all of them jihadist related. In fact, a majority of them are still separatist related in France and Spain, for example, and of course here in Ireland as well. That figure of 211 is the highest on record since we've been doing this work, at least since 2006. But of those, clearly the large-scale jihadist attacks deserve the greatest attention. 17 of those last year, which was up from just 4 the year before. 150 people killed, compared to just 4 the year before in those jihadist attacks. And that's not to mention the 60 other EU nationals that were killed outside the EU, such as the attack in Tunisia that John also mentioned. It's also not to mention, of course, the 120 already killed this year in the dreadful attacks that we've seen. So figures really show you just what the threat looks like at the moment. 667 arrests relating to jihadi terrorism in 2015, almost twice as much as the year before. That's an indication both of the nature of the threat, but also just how hard police forces are working around Europe to catch these guys and stop them doing their work. And I can tell you, in a large majority of the cases, these terrorist plots are indeed stopped in time, and sometimes in ways that the public don't see at large. But given the dreadful implications of just one terrorist attack, then just one terrorist attack must be seen somewhere as a failure of the system. And we have to continuously learn the lessons of that. And our analysis, therefore, of the threat, especially as Paul was describing it, means that we have to change the way in which we're doing our police and security service work, certainly become more transnational in our cooperation, to illustrate a point John made, to look at the fact that the threat at the moment is sustained, first of all, by very high numbers, 5,000 terrorist fighters that have gone to Syria and Iraq. About one-third of them have returned. Some of those are returning in a covert way, using a false passport to get into the European Union and then move around. So not always easy to pick them up. That figure, of course, also supplemented by all those that have stayed at home, like the lone actors that we've been hearing about, who don't go to Syria and Iraq and are still capable of carrying out the kind of attack we saw in Nice. So a very large, generally dispersed and unconnected community, volatile in nature, unpredictable in nature, almost carrying out sort of almost random-like activities. Extremely difficult for security services to keep a handle on that all of the time. Also supplemented, of course, by this ubiquitous reach that ISIS has, in particular, via social media, and the innovative ways, much more than any terrorist group in the past, has used the internet and social media platforms to get its propaganda message across, to use that as a way to recruit its followers as well, a key part of the threat that we must respond to. And in terms of these foreign fighters, some similarities to the lone actors, others not maybe. The profile of these people also have changed to a certain extent. Much more tech-savvy, as I've been saying. A higher proportion of women that are going out than we might expect, and a marked increase in that proportion in this year for whatever reason, which is interesting. But most of them are men, of course, young men. Most of them, perhaps like the lone actors who stay at home, are generally disaffected from their families or their community. They've had low educational employment opportunities. They very often have mental health problems as well, in about 20% of the cases at least. But as a shift from what we've seen in the past, from the days of the sort of bin Laden followers, Al-Qaeda related, generally less religious, actually, in what appears to be motivating them. They're not really religious zealots and extremists who see themselves dying as martyrs on the battlefield. They're a bit more see themselves as military heroes from almost a gaming culture, from a gangland background, very often in many of the cases. And many of these people don't seem to be driven much by religious extremism at all. It's almost like a convenient flag by which they go and join this group to fight in Syria and Iraq. And radicalised, not after attending years of radical preachings by imams in mosques, as we have in the past, now radicalised much more quickly, in some cases in weeks, through the power of peer pressure, role modelling from older brothers or fathers or uncles or colleagues and friends from maybe also a similar gang-type background. in weeks, radicalized through a community in that way, but also through the power of social media and going out to fight very quickly. So the intelligence timeline for capturing these people is very, very short and makes it an even greater challenge for the security authorities. But also, very important new part of this profile, not new, but a more significant part of the profile is their criminal background from their gang culture, or in many cases that Europol have noticed, even connections with organised crime syndicates. Now that's important because it says something about how we should gear our response in a different way. It means that the rather exclusive, closed world of the intelligence community, and it's closed for a very good reason, sometimes now is not enough on its own to track these people. The information about who they are, where they're from, who they might still be in contact with from the criminal days, are more likely to be found in police files rather than in the intelligence world. And basic police files, down at the level even of regional drug squads, for example. So the challenge for all of us, at the national level and certainly across Europe, is how we can connect in a better, more seamless way the rather closed data sets of the intelligence world with a much larger open sets of the police world. And that's been a big part of why ministers at the European level have decided to establish this European Counterterrorism Centre, to give Europol the task to try and get a better handle on levels of information sharing right across Europe. And indeed, that's been a key part of the way in which we've designed our new centre. And to some effect, actually, we've had a marked increase, particularly since the attacks in Paris and Brussels, in the amount of intelligence, even coming from security service now, that are shared with Europol. And we run a dedicated database of tracking the movements of foreign fighters in particular. We have some 5,500 that are now identified in our files. What else, though, about our centre? Was designed to look at the other issues that are really important here as well, in the internet. So we've established a European-wide internet referral unit, and we are a centrepiece, a platform that connects the whole of the police community in Europe on one side with the social media platforms on the other. And we are the go-between in most of those cases. We identify some of the most poisonous accounts ourselves, these terrible YouTube videos that you see, many Twitter accounts, and we work with the social media partners every day to identify those, flag them up and make sure that those social media companies take the right decision to remove that material. It's extremely challenging. The scale of this is extraordinary. Twitter themselves have said they removed 125,000 accounts related to ISIS in less than 9 months. 125,000. And there are 60 social media platforms out there that we've tracked that ISIS are using. The speed, 1 million hits on one of these videos that was produced following the attacks in Paris. 1 million hits in 36 hours. As well as the resilience of the rather organic way in which an account is taken down and automatically regenerated in a different space. So we have to be smart. We've taken out over 10,000 in less than a year, but we have to do much more than just play the numbers game, and we're focusing our work amongst those 10,000 accounts on those that have the greatest strategic significance for ISIS. So we're looking at those that are operating as automatic translation tools. An ISIS message generated in English automatically translated through one account into 10 European languages. We're taking that account out so we can have a wider impact. That's a really important part of our work. Tracking terrorist financing. In the days after the Paris attacks, we were able to, through our unique collaboration with the Americans especially, we were able to give the Paris investigators dozens of financial intelligence leads relating to the suspects. And this has always been the case also in organised crime, where you follow the money, you get a much better picture of who's involved. And that applies as much as it does in terrorism as well. So that's the centre, and we're drawing together some of the best experts in the world that are forming a kind of a task force style unit at the centre of that to try and support the top investigations. And we've been drawn in very much into the front line of helping the French and the Belgian investigators deal with these terrible incidents in the last few months. We've been analysing enormous amounts of data, channeling these financial intelligence reports, identifying a lot of leads to other countries, which we can then do something about, helping to track down some other remaining members of the wider network. But to do it from a European perspective, quite rightly, the French and Belgian investigators are doing what's right for their national interests. What we're trying to do is understand from this, what does it look like across Europe as a whole? Where are the other leads? Where are these contacts that might be the next people to carry out an attack? It's very important that we carry out that work. And for the first time, we're recruiting 200 counter-terrorist detectives that we'll be sending to the front line on the external border of the European Union, firstly to Greece and I hope to Italy soon, in order that we can do something about spotting terrorists as they come into the EU in their covert way as well. Looking further ahead, though, the key challenge clearly is those returnees. I think ISIS is in decline in military terms. They're being more and more squeezed. Maybe in the future they will be a spent force. And that means, however, that we have thousands of their fighters that will come back maybe to our communities. There are 100 different nationalities amongst a fighting community of at least 20,000. And as I said, 5,000 of those are from Europe. Now, reintegrating them in a safe and secure way is going to be a generation-long struggle. And that's the thing that we're all, I think, concerned about and already working about. Just to wrap up on what some of the issues are then across all of that I've surveyed and that you've heard from John and Paul as well. Firstly, legislation. One of the default reactions very often, sometimes of politicians, sometimes of the public, is, oh, we need more legislation to guard ourselves. We don't really, actually. In the EU, we have a very, very well-developed set of counter-terrorist measures, legislative and operational measures. We just need to use them a lot more. Having said that, there are things underway already that will improve that even further. We just agreed the new PNR agreement, passenger name record, which will give the security authorities the ability to track better the offenders that are flying in and out of the European Union. A new directive on terrorism has been launched that will criminalise in every member state travelling for the purposes of terrorism, a new action plan on financial terrorism, a new action plan on firearms trafficking. So all of these measures are giving us an even stronger means by which to do the job. But we've got to use those tools in a better way than we're doing at the moment. And that's part of the sort of evangelical job that I have, going around meeting different police leaders in Europe, that, please, we have pretty good capabilities here. You've just got to use it in a bit more. So, having said that, there are these what I call public policy paradoxes that we're having to deal with when we try to get that message across. The first is this dilemma always has been in society, certainly in the modern age, about where you draw the balance between security and justice. In the online environment, for example, there are those that believe in somehow absolute privacy rights. No such thing in a modern democracy. In fact, no such thing even in an older democracy, where you've always had the principle of the social contract, whereby citizens willingly give up some of their freedoms and privacy to allow the state to protect themselves. And yet in the online world, we've reached the stage where it's more or less the only part of our life and society now that is unregulated, that doesn't have the right balance to give the authorities the tools they need to do to protect the security of the state and all citizens. And that balance hasn't yet been drawn properly. And where I see it at the European level, for example, is the way in which we've created a lot of databases, a lot of systems, all of them individually very important. The Schengen Information System, the largest data system in Europe with 64 million alerts. A visa system, a Eurodac system for incoming refugees and asylum seekers, Europol systems and so on. They're not interconnected, hardly at all. You think it might be a mistake. It's not. Lawmakers decided deliberately not to interconnect them in the name of data privacy, which is a laudable aim, but you have then security implications because of that. And as a result, after Paris, there is a need for some sort of system re-engineering, which is now what the political consensus seems to be. So security and justice are one of those paradoxes where we still haven't got the right balance, and I'm not pretending to have the solution, but it's one of those that overlays all of this. The other one is where you draw the line between national and international responsibility. In the EU, terrorism is regarded as a national security, which of course it is. It's a part of national security. There's a red line through the European treaties, very clearly. National security matters, and I quote from the treaties, shall be the sole responsibility of the member states. fine. But what that means is terrorism which has long since become a transnational problem in all of the ways I've been describing, the way in which it operates on the borderless internet, the way in which these foreign fighters are travelling across multiple borders, for example, long since become a transnational problem, yet all of our systems seem to be rooted in a national-only response. And I'm not calling, therefore, for the creation of a European CIA, but I do think we need to mitigate the consequences of that and be realistic. And it means that certainly in information sharing, we have to perhaps be a little bit more open from a national level than we have done in the past. And I think there's a role for Europol in making that connection and in helping to bridge some of the problems that we have. Thank you.